So I had the pleasure of getting acquainted with our guest speaker. How many years has it been? Several, okay. And Frank Sherwin is with the Institute for Creation Research. They are based in Dallas-Fort Worth area, not too far east of the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. And highly recommend it if you have a chance to go there to their, it's not a museum, it's a discovery center, okay. Great stuff there. And he's got some interesting credentials. He's got a wonderful history. And we could be here for a long time talking about a lot of different things, but we're going to focus tonight on those four things: poisons, parasites, pathogens, and predation. That's called an alliteration tongue twister, isn't it, right? So I will let him tell more about himself and his ministry. Frank Sherwin, come on up and please give him a warm welcome.
All right. Thank you very much, Michael, and good evening, everybody. It's always good to be back in the great state of Arizona. I love it. As a matter of fact, as we say in Texas, I'm grinning like a butcher's dog. Thank you. Thank you. I was reading a fascinating book. I couldn't put it down. It's about anti-gravity. All right, so anyways, Michael said I've been with ICR since 1996. Thank you. Thank you. And so a lot of things have happened since I've been with ICR, and it is just a wonderful blessing to be able to worship the Lord and serve Him as what we call a creation scientist. And we believe that all science is creation science. You know, if God created everything, it follows that all science is creation science. And so my field is parasites. I'm what you call an invertebrate zoologist or a parasitologist, and I studied under an atheist, the late Gerald Schmidt, who literally wrote the book on parasites, and I discovered a new species of parasite. And when you discover a new species, you get to name it. So I named it Acuaria coloradensis. Why would I call it coloradensis? Very good, because I found it in Colorado. Science is so easy. And creation science is even easier. We see that science and the Bible go together like butter and bread. Science and the Bible, if you interpret it correctly, are inextricably linked, just like politics and corruption. You just cannot separate them at all. All right, well, I guess I better move along here. And let's go ahead and have the next slide. Do I advance it or? There we go, yeah. So no animals died or were eaten before Adam sinned. We read about that in Genesis chapter 1. And we're starting off by looking at the creation and, of course, the corruption of the creation. And God said, "Behold, I've given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life. I have given every green herb for meat," and it was so. Next slide. Or do I advance it? There we go. At the end of day 6, God said all was very good. And God saw everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. So folks, this one verse that we've just read here precludes any interpretation of Genesis which seeks to accommodate those expansive geologic ages in its system. The so-called geologic ages are identified by the fossils found in the sedimentary rocks of the Earth's crust, which supposedly depict a billion-year history of the evolution of life on the Earth. And so, in other words, when you look at all the trillions of fossils in the fossil record, now the fossil record are all the sedimentary rock units that we find, for example, in one of my favorite places, just north of here. It's called, what is it called, Michael? Grand Canyon, yeah, Grand Canyon, and we see these layers of sedimentary rock in Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon does have fossils, but not as many as perhaps the park rangers like. But the point is this: when you look at the sedimentary rock units, you find trillions of fossils, and they're extremely well formed. It was like they were suddenly and catastrophically buried, like you would get with a A flood, yeah. A flood could do something like a really big flood, as we read about in the opening chapters of the book of Beginnings, the book of Genesis. And so that's where we stand as creation scientists. And we look at the fossil record and we see it's a record of death and destruction. And so when ICR used to have tours of Grand Canyon back about 15, 20 years ago, we would show up as I was a backpacker, and so I would take a group of people, anywhere from 5 to 20 people, and we would take the switchbacks down the south rim of Grand Canyon to the very bottom where the Colorado River is, and we would stop at every major layer and investigate the layer from a Genesis flood perspective. And every single one of those layers has an indication that it was laid down by water. As that great American philosopher Gomer Pyle said, surprise, surprise. And so all those layers are laid down by running water like you get with a flood. And the most common types of sedimentary rock that we find, for example, in Grand Canyon are sandstone, limestone, and shale. Those are the most common types of sedimentary rock. Sandstone, limestone, shale. Kind of sounds like a law firm. But anyway, thank you. Those are the sedimentary rocks. And so that's our interpretation. We don't look at the rocks in terms of the alleged millions and millions of years, and I'll be getting into that in just a little bit. So 6 times before in this chapter, God had adjudged his work to be good. Now, after completing everything, he declared it all to be exceedingly good. Look at that. The literal meaning of the Hebrew word rendered very. The evolutionary ages of geology represent 1 billion years of wasteful inefficiency and profound cruelty if they were indeed a part of God's work. They would completely discredit God as a God of order, intelligence, power, grace, and love. Death represents the wages of sin, as Paul tells us about in Romans chapter 6, not of divine love. So it says that given you every herb, as it says in Genesis, it's plain that both men and animals were originally intended to be vegetarian and herbivorous in their appetites. There was adequate nourishment and energy value available in the fruits and herbs to enable both to accomplish the work of God had given them to do. And so we believe they were all herbivorous at one time. The question as to how or when some of the animals became carnivorous is not definitively answerable, since the Bible does not say. So we're not quite sure about when exactly this occurred. Even today, both animals and men can live on a strictly vegetarian herbivorous diet. So we're seeing in this presentation a perfect world gone wrong. Now, my field is parasitology. I study, parasites, and it's a very unsavory subject. I understand that, so I never talk about it just before supper, right? Just before you're going to have spaghetti. Boy, rough crowd here this evening. But anyway, this is one of my favorite warnings. This was found in some places, like, for example, New Zealand, and other places, where the warning is to keep your head above water. Why? Because there's a single-celled, it's called a protozoan parasite called Naegleria fowleri. It's a devastating parasite. And once it gets up through past what we call the cribriform plate that separates the skull, the top of the skull, the brain from the rest of the face, if you dive into the water, this trophozoite stage will start migrating up the nerves of the nose, where you dove into the water and that parasite gets driven there, and it migrates up, pass through the cribriform plate, which has a number of holes in it, and then it begins to degrade the brain tissue. It's really a devastating, painful way to go. And so that's why they say to keep your head above water so you don't get that protozoan parasite up into your nose there. So there was another function, we believe, for Naegleria fowleri before God cursed the earth. So what was the function of this creature in God's very good creation? That's why they call us the Institute for Creation Research, right. We're not the Institute for Creation Answers. We're the Institute for Creation Research. We're doing the research, and we're getting really good Bible-based answers that are non-evolutionary. So biblical creationists believe that all animals were vegetarian before the fall. Zoologists were not aware that crocodiles routinely eat vegetation, including fruit, not just because meat can be scarce at times, but because they actually enjoy it. Studies of their droppings reveal seeds, grasses, and fruits. Who would have guessed that crocodiles, alligators actually like to eat vegetation? But they do. Alligators grow well on a variety of different diets, including feeds containing inexpensive carbs and plant protein, according to the Integrative and Comparative Biology back in 2015, according to a group of evolutionists. One study found that 13 of the 18 crocodilian species it examined eat fruit from 34 different plant families, and that was, fairly recently as well in the Secular Journal of Zoology. The most interesting thing we discovered was how frequently, it seems, extinct crocodiliforms ate plants, according to a doctoral student in 2019 at the University of Utah. So it's kind of interesting to see that there are a number of quote-unquote carnivorous animals that in fact are herbivorous, and they do like to eat a balanced diet, if you can say that. And so that's something that I was interested in as a zoologist. In fact, animals like their veggies, and these are undocumented, this is not done by AI or anything like this. This is actually real pictures of animals that like to eat the vegetables as we see here. So how interesting is that? Scientists have discovered that some sharks, that's right, sharks are eating a large amount of seagrass as a significant part of their diet. But experts aren't sure why the fish are deviating from their traditional carnivorous diet, according to National Geographic in 2017. A small coastal shark called the bonnethead shark eats copious, a whole bunch of seagrass. And look at this. Has adaptations in its digestive system to process vegetation, according to new research. Well, when I was doing my master's research at the University of Northern Colorado, all of my professors were atheists, dyed-in-the-wool, USDA-inspected atheists, and I talked to my major professor, the late Gerald Schmidt, as I mentioned, and people would send him the spiral valve of sharks, elasmobranchs. The spiral valve is a special valve in the digestive system which slows down the food as the shark eats it, and it looks like an auger, a fleshy auger. It's really kind of, well, the scientific word is spooky to look at this like it's kind of a fleshy auger, and sure enough, parasites affix themselves onto this auger-like structure in the GI tract, and so I did some research in that as well. It's called Paracristinella, as I remember it, and so maybe this auger-like structure that's found in the GI tract of the elasmobranchs helped to slow down food, such as vegetation, which takes time to break down some of the cellulose-based plant material. So, a vegetarian, the research gathered and documented numerous examples from the literature of, that's right, spiders eating plant food, spiders. According to their systematic review, spiders from 10 families have been reported feeding on a wide variety of different plant types, such as trees, shrubs, weeds, grasses, ferns, or orchids. They also show a diverse taste when it comes to the type of plant food. Nectar, plant sap, honeydew, leaf tissue, pollen, and seeds are all on the menu, 2016, just 10 short years ago. So again, we're seeing animals that we never would think would be animals that would even look at vegetation, and here they are, they're getting fat, dumb, and happy, eating vegetables and fruits. Who would have guessed? But then there was the curse. Cursed is the ground for thy sake, and sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat of the herb of the field. And so this is what happened when God cursed the earth. He cursed the earth with things that we're going to see here, and this probably includes, for example, parasites. Over the far end of the side there, that's what I study. I study parasites, and that's Necator americanus. It's a type of nematode, very small, found in the southern United States. And we have mutations right in the center there, where you have deoxyribonucleic acid. It gets either a mutation or at least some kind of dysfunction associated with it. And of course, we're also cursed with the telemarketers as well. So we have, that's a result of the fall. Pastor, I love you, brother. Good in the original creation. This is what we believe at ICR. Many currently pathogenic means disease-causing microbes, and viruses may have possessed a function that was actually helpful or beneficial. And so we're not saying, as creationists, as scientists, we're not saying that after Adam and Eve fell, our first parents, thousands of years ago, God then had to start creating parasites and creating deleterious viruses and carnivorous beings and all that. No, we read in Genesis that creation was fixed, and creation was at the end there. And so what happened was that when Adam and Eve fell, then God cursed the earth, and a lot of these beneficial or neutral type creatures then took on a parasitic, for example, existence. Now at this point, sometimes evolutionists, critics of creation will say, yeah, well, that doesn't work with me because God also created the immune system. And why would God look at everything and say it was very good if he has given us an immune system that battles disease and all? And that is a good question. Well, the answer, and we're finding out, it's not an immune system that we have, although they call it an immune system. I would disagree. Well, what's it called, Frank? It's called the microbe interface system. The microbe interface system. Have you ever heard of the microbiome? We have a microbiome in our large intestine, okay? 1% of the microbiome in our large intestine is E. coli. And we've all heard of E. coli before. It helps to synthesize B vitamins and all. But we also have microbiome on our skin. And so we have a microbiome on our skin. We have the microbiome in our large intestine. We even have a microbiome in our eye. And a couple of years ago, I wrote an article in ICR on the microbiome of the eye. Now, what is this microbiome? Well, it has to communicate with the rest of the body, and it does so with the microbe interface. It's an interface system. So the microbe interface system was a system designed to communicate with the rest of the body by way of the cells that we have of the so-called immune system. And we're finding out now through research that this microbe interface system, aka immune system, had a function prior to the fall. Well, that gets into a whole different presentation, but it's really exciting to do the investigation and to do the research. Hey, that's in our name. The Institute for Creation. Yeah, it's just us here this evening. Institute for Creation Research. And so you bet, that's what we're all about. Put another way, could parasites and disease-causing bacteria, that we call it post-fall, be slight genetic variations from the very good ancestors pre-fall? That's the question of the evening. And I think it works. It works. We find that when God cursed the earth, a lot of these creatures and, for example, bacteria and viruses took on a pathogenic type of a situation. Creation scientists suggest that pathogenic, disease-causing bacteria and parasites of today were, in fact, beneficial or at least neutral in their pre-fallen world. Consider the sometimes disease-causing but otherwise beneficial bacteria in our large intestine. I just mentioned a minute ago, Escherichia coli. Synthesizes of B vitamins, maintains the balance of normal intestinal flora, and so forth. And we've all heard stories about E. coli outbreaks, and that can be very, very devastating, as, for example, beef can be contaminated. The corruption of existing functions. It's much easier to damage or make defective an existing function than it is to build a new one. For example, the original benign function for disease causing bacteria. And so this is what happens when we, as we continue to do the research, we're finding these kinds of changes. This comes from Live Science 2013, Dateline, New York. Nature is full of poisons that can be good for humans. And that's it. That's what we've been talking about for years. And we've all heard about some poisons that can kill, but in very, very small amounts, they can cure. And so one of the beauties of doing biochemistry is to finding out when can it take on a more curative role than killing the patient. And so, for example, tetrodotoxin, TTX, is a potent neurotoxin. I talked about this the other night. This is what? This is a pufferfish, right? And in Japan, they love to prepare and eat pufferfish. But in order to prepare it, you need to be licensed by the state, as it were. And so you have these cooks and those that prepare the pufferfish. They have to actually take very detailed tests to make sure that they know how to prepare this so that the people can eat the flesh of the pufferfish and not die by its poisons. And sadly, there are annual people that die every year in Japan because it had not been prepared correctly. And they say people who almost died by it, they say the first thing that happens when they eat it is that their lips and their tongue become numb. And of course, that's an indication that something is wrong. So benefits of TTX include an analgesic, that is a painkiller, a prevention for ischemic damage after a stroke, and it may also be used as an anesthetic. Search for opioid alternatives explores pufferfish venom for precise pain killing. We all are very familiar with the opioids and how badly they are being used on the street and all. And so it looks like there might be something to this kinds of research that we see. How about snakes? There are two types of snakes, non-venomous and venomous. Both appear to be superbly designed to kill their prey. In his book, The Material Basis of Evolution, geneticist Richard Goldschmidt offered a challenge to his evolutionary colleagues to explain and there's that key word, class, origin. Remember the word origin in Darwin's infamous book? The origin of the species by means of natural selection, preservation of favored races, and all that. It was published in 1859. It turned the Western world upside down. One thing that Darwin never talked about in his infamous book was the origin of the species. He never got around to talking about that. And so we like to ask the question publicly, what about the origin of snakes? What about the origin, for example, of dinosaurs? And Michael mentioned dinosaurs. We love dinosaurs at ICR. You know what we call them? Missionary lizards. Because they really are, I think, a testimony to God's creative design and all that he has done. And so we have books out there on dinosaurs. We just love them. But the origin of poison apparatus of snakes by way of an accumulation of small evolutionary changes. And this is by a guy by the name of Palmer in England. He's not a creationist. And so the work is being done. What about the origin of snakes? They still don't know the origin of snakes. Snakes show up in the fossil record just like dinosaurs show up in the fossil record. And venom is used for killing prey, for defense, and to assist with digestion of their prey. Could this also aid in the digestion of vegetable matter? I think that's a valid question. Let's go ahead and ask that question. You know, that's what empirical science is all about, right? Asking questions. Empirical science means that which we can observe and test and repeat and ask questions about and do the work, do the research. Michael Benton, down there at the bottom of the screen, he is an English vertebrate paleontologist. He said in his 2015 vertebrate paleontology book, biologists and those who study fossils have debated the origin of snakes for more than a century. The debate is far from resolved. But you can see the creationist in the back of the room waving a white hanky saying, I know, I know. And they're just ignoring us. But yeah, God created snakes as snakes. He created dinosaurs as dinosaurs. People as people. You bet. And so there are efforts to to develop drugs based on venom, an area that is already, don't try this at home, please. Okay. Shown benefits in cardiovascular disease and could prove important in the treatment of pain and neurological disorders, as well as other human diseases, Dr. Gibbs said. And this comes from Ohio State News 2019. And so there's I thought that'd wake a lot of people up. I included that picture there. But the point is that, yes, some of these toxins could kill, but under certain other conditions, if you use in a greatly diluted form, they can cure. And so let's look at that. And that always brings me up to this. The effort involved working with botulinum neurotoxins, which are widely known to be toxic under some circumstances and therapeutic under others. They can present as botulism, for example, a well-known kind of food poisoning. We've all heard of that before, haven't we? Like canning, they use the heat in the canning, and then they put the lids on there, and if it's not quite right, the botulinum bacteria can grow inside the canned food there. But they also are used in another form to make Botox, and we've heard of Botox, which is used to treat migraines and as cosmetic therapies. And so this is what happened. People realized, if you take some of that botulinum toxin, which is so devastating, so deadly, and you really dilute it just a whole bunch, and then you purify it, and then you can see if we could go ahead and use a syringe and use that to get rid of crow's feet around the eyes, and it works. And people, usually ladies, they have these Botox parties, don't they, where they have the physician there and he injects, and the ladies are there and all, and They found out, not only do the crow's feet disappear for months and then they slowly return, but they started to realize, wait a minute, I haven't had a migraine since I've had this treatment here. And so this idea that migraine headaches and Botox work together. And so then they started having people with really severe migraines, and they would get Botox injections all around their skull, in their scalp there. And sometimes it works, but sadly, sometimes it doesn't work. Listeria becomes nasty when starved of oxygen, reported Eureka Alert. Limiting oxygen produces bacteria up to 100 times more invasive than similar bacteria grown with ample oxygen supplies. Could this imply that a world with different atmosphere or soil conditions, maybe that could have been less prone to disease? We can, again, ask the question. Could the bacteria we fear most have been placid or even beneficial in such an environment? And that was said back in 2007. There's been more work that has been done. You've heard of cholera, right? Cholera usually follows these very devastating fires or natural disasters that occur, for example, in third world countries. The pathology of cholera results from a defective regulation of adenylene cyclase and overproduction of the second messenger, cyclic AMP. The Vibrio cholera, that's a genus species name for this bacteria, causes the human intestinal disease cholera. And so maybe it had a beneficial function. As a matter of fact, what if prior to the fall, this cholera toxin had an alternative function? That's a great question to ask, and that fits so beautifully with creation science. We can ask that question. A very similar toxin is produced by Vibrio fischeri. That's a genus species name, which is a curious light-emitting symbiotic bacterium found in the Hawaiian bobtail squid. Maybe, this one evolutionist said at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, maybe we've been studying cholera pathogenesis. We've been studying an aspect of normal conversation that's gone wrong. And so using our young earth creation science alternative, we're asking the questions that maybe this would have been a beneficial bacterium prior to the fall, and in some cases, like we see here, it's still used as in a beneficial type condition. Well, one of my favorite types of viruses, it looks like a lunar lander, doesn't it? It's actually a virus. You can barely see it with an electron microscope, and that's what that color picture is down there. That's an electron microscope showing an E. coli cell that is being infected by dozens of bacteriophages. A bacteriophage is simply a virus designed to attack bacteria like E. coli. And so almost all known bacteria have a specific predatory bacteriophage, a virus that attacks it. And that results in what we call a balanced ecosystem. And just a couple of decades ago, scientists found out how balanced, amazingly balanced, this balanced ecosystem is. And it involves nothing less than the oceans of the world. The oceans of the world. Think about it. Our oceans are wet, so that produces the water that's needed for bacteria to grow and proliferate. There's all sorts of sunlight that helps with bacterial growth. The ocean waters are full of nutrients that helps with bacterial growth. There's all sorts of oxygenation that occurs with the waves and everything. And so why is it our oceans don't turn into a huge sink for growing bacteria, and the bacteria just continue to grow and grow and continue to grow and nothing to stop it? So what did God do, the Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ? He created those bacteriophages, those viruses that attack bacteria. And so what we find is that these bacteriophages grow along with the bacteria in the oceans, and when the bacteria start to get kind of out of control, these bacteriophages start to destroy the bacteria. They land on the bacteria, like you saw in the previous slide, and actually inject its genetic material into the bacteria, and the genetic material reproduces, and the cell bursts open and dies. When it bursts open, it releases more bacteriophages, which go on to infect more bacteria. Now, this is a cyclic phenomena, folks, that occurs every 24 hours. So you find a high amount of bacteria that's growing, but the bacteriophages are right behind it. They start to kill the bacteria. The numbers drop down, and then it goes like that in approximately a 24-hour cycle. And that's why our oceans remain clean and balanced, is due to these little guys called bacteriophages. So it really is kind of neat to see how that all works. Well, I got to get into my field, parasites. And I thought I'd include this picture. Sushi is still your best bet for intestinal worms. That's not a real bacteria, not a real billboard, but I had to include it. All right, well, moving right along. My research is in the Journal of Parasitology. That's the reference there. My research is entitled Helminths, that is worms of swallows of the mountains of Colorado. There's specific swallows called tree swallows, and they're in the higher altitudes of the mountains of Colorado. This book here is by Gerald Schmidt. He was my major professor. He was an atheist, unfortunately, but he said, okay, I'll have you as my graduate student, because I told him, I'm a believer, I'm a Christian. He was not happy about that, but he went ahead and let me be his graduate student. Larry Roberts, as you see there, that name, he's an invertebrate zoologist in Texas. And so a parasite is a type of symbiont or dissimilar organisms living together in close association. And obligate parasites, facultative parasites, these are the different kinds of parasites that we find in the world. I won't go into too much detail, But the question is, were parasites in their original form beneficial? And I think they were. We didn't call them parasites prior to God cursing the earth. They were simply worms that lived in the environment. They may have lived with people, lived with animals in a mutualistic relationship. So we cannot be sure about that because we can't go back in time and make that observation. But it seems to make sense. If the earth is as young as we would say that it is, and if it really was that parasites were not parasites in their original form, then this begins to make a lot of sense. The challenges of parasitology. Locher and Hofkin, writing in their textbook, said opinions vary on how to define some of the key aspects of parasites and their biology. And so they also said this in their second edition in the early 2000s. Just a couple of years ago. So is parasitism bad? Well, one secular author said parasitism usually implies that some harm is done to the host, but this interpretation must be qualified. Effects on the host ranges from almost none to severe illness and eventual death. But even when such obvious immediate harm accrues to the individual host, it doesn't follow that the relationship is harmful to the host species in the long term. So what Allaby, the evolutionist, is saying is we just can't paint with a wide brush and say all parasites are bad, because now they're finding out through further research that some parasites are neutral. So a person can be infected with a parasite, for example, a helminth, for example, which is a worm, and show no negative situation there. And so they're finding more and more examples sometimes of even parasites that can be beneficial, especially when it comes to some diseases like MS, multiple sclerosis. They're finding, this is not a wide opinion, but they're finding that some people with MS conditions, if they have a number of parasites, their MS condition seems to not be as serious as it could be. So they're doing research in that area. Immunoinflammatory response. This is a fancy way of saying that the body responds too much and too hard to a person who has an infection with the parasite. So it turns out that the body responding to the parasite infection is so devastating, that's what hurts the person. Not so much what the parasite is doing, so much as our microbe interface system or the immune system responding to that infection. You can see the ulceration and the ankle of the individual there. That's a type of roundworm that is found in, in the Middle East, and it's almost eradicated. There's only a few dozen more people today that have this particular, it's called Dracunculum medinensis, the guinea worm, and it looks like it's on its way out. There's only a few dozen people that have it anymore, so we can pray to that end. And then we have other protozoan parasites, as you see there. So consider mutualistic interactions. Each creature benefits from the other. Examples are the yucca moth and the cleaner fish. I wish I had time to talk about them. Just amazing. Darwinism fails to explain these finely tuned interactions. Perhaps our categories are too simplistic. We often put viruses in the bad category since they invade a host cell and they use its machinery to make copies of themselves. Why then do only a fraction of viruses cause disease? And that's true. It's those negative, deleterious viruses that get all the bad press. But think of those bacteriophages I was talking about earlier that help to keep the oceans clean. That's fascinating. What are the others doing? Many of them kill bacteria. That's good, isn't it? And that's what we just saw using the oceans as an example. Maybe we should take a fresh look. In biology, there are many pushes and pulls. Pushes and pulls are not good or bad. They are opposite forces that maintain homeostasis. And that was written by a friend of mine named David. Well, after the fall, some creation zoologists suggest free living creatures became parasitic after the fall. Parasitic species have retained some morphological, that is, their physical shape resemblance, with their free living counterparts. And Poulin is no creationist, but boy, he says a lot of things that make me, as a creation zoologist, parasitologist, sit up and take notice. And I'm going, yeah. Well, that fits the creation model as well. So these are very exciting. Strongyloides stercoralis. Strongyloides has a phase of its life cycle which it doesn't interact with people at all. It lives out in the environment just fine, generation after generation. But if a person gets in the way and maybe swallows some of the eggs or whatever, then of course their day is ruined. It can be a very serious infection. And so what we're saying is maybe Strongyloides, as you see there, was just a simple free living creature prior to the fall. And that when God cursed the earth, there was a subtle change there that resulted on occasion for it to be a parasite. Thus, within the suborder, one can observe completely free living species that are never infecting people, facultative parasites, obligate parasites, and even species that produce free living or parasitic populations depending on environmental conditions. And so here we find some evolutionists who are saying the same thing that we're saying as creationists. So this is some very exciting research. Having millions of parasites living in your gut may actually be a benefit if you also have, and I mentioned this earlier, multiple sclerosis, a study has found. And this is the BBC News, which is no friend of the creationist. And they wrote this back in 2007. There's been some more research done on that. The methods used by creatures to stop our immune system, that is the microbe interface system, wiping them out, could be keeping the illness at bay. And then the Annals of Neurology study found that the parasite-riddled group has far fewer multiple sclerosis relapses. The infected patients were infested with a variety of different species: tapeworms, nematodes, whipworms, and pinworms. Recent theory provides several possible explanations for such neutral to even positive effects of stomach nematodes on host fitness. And this was done by a researcher in 2019, stomach nematodes of cotton rats. And he's asking the question, could even those things be mutualistic? And, you know, again, we as creationists in the back of the room are saying, yes, this is really what biblical creation is all about, especially when it comes to the fall. However, predation enhances the regenerative capabilities of the coral colony, such as the total effect of parasitism on the coral colony's fitness may be positive. Over and over again, we're finding examples. Well, I'll just show you a few more slides, and then I want to share with you what we have on the book table there. This is just the introduction of my talk. I haven't got to the main body. So, an evolutionary non-explanation for parasites. I just thought I'd share with you what they're saying. Almost all the traditional generalizations about parasite evolution are myths, metaphors, and misconceptions, unsupported by data and based on a lack of robust analytical method for reconstructing evolutionary history. Ouch. A big ouch. And the guy who said this, Brooks and McClellan, are not creationists. But I salute them, I applaud them, because they said most are myths, metaphors, and misconceptions unsupported by data. And we're going, yeah. Let's take a second look at so-called parasite evolution. The biological processes that characterize host-parasite interactions rely on a multitude of cascading biochemical reactions, as you see in the diagram there, that involve chemically different molecules such as DNA, RNA, and proteins. And so it gets very, very complex. And then finally, I'm going to end with this evening. It would be difficult, if not impossible, to explain step by step the details of the process of evolution by which some of the highly specialized parasites reach their present condition. So what they're basically saying is they cannot trace the evolution of parasites. They just kind of show up as that. And this fits beautifully with the creation model when it says in Genesis that God cursed the earth. When he cursed the earth, we believe he cursed the earth with weeds and thorns and thistles, probably parasites, probably mutations. All of that was part of the curse just thousands of years ago. And now as we continue to do the research, we find it's not simply a white and black issue, bad versus bad versus good, but there are some poisons that can be beneficial. There are some parasites that can be beneficial. Some of these viruses are very important, and so it's working out more and more to the benefit of creation science. So I appreciate you folks showing up this evening, this chilly evening here.